you so much for joining this episode of Politics for Parents. I'm so excited to bring this discussion with Kathryn Anne Edwards to you because Kathryn is a mom and an economist, and she has recently published a proposal for a comprehensive child development system in America, which is so exciting, I think, for me in this podcast. My first episode was about summer camp and how impossible summer can be for working parents. And we've talked over the episodes about all the challenges that working families face, moms face, before care, after care, noon dismissals, as well as, of course, the incredible cost and limited availability of quality child care for those early years when you have a newborn and you still have to work those 0 to 5 years. So Kathryn has tackled it all with her proposal. She tells us how we can pay for it. She is leveraging the efficiency of plugging into systems that are already in place. I think it makes sense. And I'm going to link to her proposal in the show notes as well as her newsletter so you can continue to follow her work. I plan to print her proposal out, highlight key sections, and drop it off at my congressman's office when he is home for recess in August. And I invite you all to do the same. Call your parent friends, get your grandparents out there, get everyone to advocate for this because I think it's a feasible solution if we get optimistic and work together and just take the lead from Kathryn, because this is just a really great idea and we can make it happen. So let's do it. Thanks. So Kathryn, thank you so much for spending time with me today, because I know you are a mom and you are just doing a lot of different projects and very important work. And I know your time is valuable. So I really appreciate you spending time here and also for your work, because I think a lot of the parents listening are going to be really excited to hear what you're suggesting with your big proposal for a comprehensive child development system. So thank you so much for your time today and your work.
Of course, happy to be here.
So I'll quickly read your bio, and then I would love for you to tell us more about your journey and your career path, and why we should listen to you, because I think you've got such an impressive background. You're a PhD economist and an independent economic policy consultant. Your research focuses on the intersection of labor markets and public policy, including unemployment and unemployment insurance, recessions and recoveries, women's labor supply, poverty alleviation, retirement security, and social security. You've testified 3 times in front of Congress about economic policy. You write a weekly column on the economy for Bloomberg. So that is a lot and wonderful.
It sounds really impressive when you read it out like that. I'm like, wow, look at me.
Good for you. It is. You're
So I
very impressive.
I need to make sure to give myself flowers. A lot of the times I feel like a fledgling mess, but then when you say it like that, I'm like, girl, you did something.
Yes, you did. So anyway, just tell us a little bit about your work, because I also have done a little dabbling in labor market economics, and you've found your place now. I think a lot of your content skews towards, families, policies that will help families. And I'd love to kind of bridge this gap in how you started out in maybe more of a traditional labor market economic sense, and how that brought you to where you are today, advocating for policies for family, and specifically your work on childcare and what childcare means to the economy.
Sure. So I am a, classically trained PhD economist. I went to the University of Wisconsin, go Bucky, but I should say I went to UT Austin for undergrad. So go Horns, hook 'em. I got to make sure I can't say one public school elevated above another. And I was always fascinated by this, very American notion that for the vast majority of people, economic stability and security and success and prosperity, it all comes from a job. But at the same time, there are a lot of people for whom the labor market either does not fit, does not work, does not thrive. And so most of what I did was always looking around the edges of the labor market, of who can't work, who's not making money, who's not able to hold down a job. And that kind of bridges a bunch of scenarios of people who are entering retirement. So are they okay in retirement? They are disabled. Are they okay in their disability status? They have really low wages. Why do they have such low wages? They can't find a job because it's a recession. And so everything I do is really spanning when the job just isn't working for people. And most of the time I looked at these kind of more like shocks is how economists think of them, as like something bad happens and you weren't prepared for it. Like there's a recession and you lose your job. You have a health crisis and you have to retire early, or you become disabled. When the pandemic happened. So after school, I got a job at the Rand Corporation, which is a research and evaluation think tank. It was a great job. And then in the pandemic, like everybody else in America, I got my new pandemic job, which is the job I had suited to the pandemic. And because I'm an expert in unemployment, I ended up being just like catapulted into the public sphere where in 2019, and y'all had heard of me. You couldn't find me on the internet if you tried. I was just at a desk doing good work on labor markets. And then, there was so much need for clarity and clarifying and explanations in the pandemic. And that's where I really found my voice. And after a few years, I kind of left the research world behind to enter the kind of influence, explanation, and public facing world because I found that I was good at it. And there weren't a lot of people like me who were good at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And that hits on kind of where I found myself when I was pursuing the path of the PhD and the economics work, because I couldn't figure out how I could actually, I thought I was just going to wind up writing white papers and talking with them about them with my other PhD friends. I'm like, what am I actually going to do to help people? So I think it's amazing that you found a way to bring this discourse to the public, because I think we need more solid analysis on these issues.
It's so hard because this is every career. This isn't just economics, but in every career, there are paths and there are some that are considered more elite or more distinguished, right? Like my sister's a lawyer and like the best people clerk. And then after that, there's like this pecking order of what we think prestige looks like within a profession. And I was really lucky. I had an economist that was at Wisconsin who told me that, there's, of course, within academia, this is so, y'all don't need to know this, but within academia, economists are so arrogant. When they look down on other disciplines of like, it's like really common practice that economists would like,
pretty funny.
Just kind of like talk trash about how a sociologist isn't as like rigorous or an anthropologist isn't as rigorous. And explaining this academic divide, he said that most economists are really like blinded by their own arrogance. And when you think of someone, giving a speech and you're in the front row, you've got people who sit to your left and to your right, and you're all there getting something different out of it, but none of you is in the front. It's, the sociologist is going to get something different than the economist, than the anthropologist, than the child development psychologist. And it's not that one of you is better. It's just that you all bring the different lens to a single issue. And I think what I found and how I adapted that into my career was to think about, what chair do you belong in? And it's not about like them being in a row with like numbers and you're in chair 3 or you're in chair 5 because you haven't published in a while. It was really just, if everybody's sitting in a row, what is it that you're meant to do? And I think I quickly came to the conclusion that I was very good at being an economist who could bring the authority of a PhD and explain things, but that it took me a while to get the confidence that that was like okay to do. Like I was allowed to do this thing where I like go on TikTok and explain childcare, that's okay. And that I haven't like let my PhD down. Like this is just the chair that I'm meant to sit in. And and I don't want to be 3 chairs to my right. That sounds awful. I quite like being here. And so it took a while for that to click. Some people I think maybe know right away, this is the chair for me, but it took me a while to kind of like, sit in the view and look at the view and decide, no, actually I belong here.
Well, I think you certainly do. And I'll use this as a jump off point to launch into what we're really here to talk about, because I think when I saw your proposal, which was recently published by the Roosevelt Institute, it's called Whole Child, Whole Day, Whole Year, Assembling a Comprehensive Child Development System for America. I was so excited when I saw that title and I saw your LinkedIn post about this proposal, because on this podcast, I have talked to parents from so many different angles about the childcare problem. And it's not just daycare in their early years and that expense, although that is in itself a very big hindrance to working families in this country. But then, as I was telling you earlier, my older child's 8, and I really started to struggle with managing everything once she was in school, once she was learning to read. I saw her peers that had moms or parents that were home with them getting ahead because they were working on reading at home. I was traveling a lot and I wasn't doing that. And I was like, okay, I either have to hire a nanny who I know can like also do math and reading with her. And how am I even going to interview this person and find the time to interview someone? Because I know at my job, interviewing people, like when you're hiring someone at your company, it takes a lot of time. So I just really appreciated your whole view because it talks about summer camp, which I've talked to parents about. Because one of the things that, we have free pre-K in our town starting at 3, which is wonderful. But now I'm in the summer where my son is 3 and he's not old enough for like any of the camps. So everyone winds up in this like school years thing where you've got noon dismissals, random holidays, teacher conferences, and your plan tackles all of it. And I'd love for you to just tell us about it.
So there is a fundamental disconnect that every parent could tell you exists between work schedules and school schedules. School starts at age 5 for the vast majority of Americans. There's some school districts where you're lucky enough to have 3 to 4, maybe, but school starts at 5. The school day ends at 3, and it doesn't go in the summer. You have a 2-month break. No one has a job that looks like that, not even teachers. The labor market is often 9 to 5, if not 8 to 6. It doesn't break for a few years when your kids are young. It doesn't stop at 3 p.m. and it doesn't give you summer break the way you had when you were a student. And you have this fundamental administrative and logistical clash between where kids go and where most parents go during the day. What I propose is simply filling that in. And if you're going to fill it in, you might as well fill it in with intention. And so if we have this empty space, let's see it as something that we can be creative and take advantage of to build into something that fills in the gaps, not just for what exists during the school day or school year, but exists in kids' education and upbringing. That is development. It's not education. It's not the love of a family, it's exposure to development. And so the child development system that I propose runs from age 0 to age 18, and it bridges early childhood, which we think of as childcare, after school and summer into a single system. The goal of this system is to mainly give kids a place where they're exposed to peer relationships, mentor relationships, and community institutions to complement their education and their family. We know from lots and lots of research on everything from early childhood to adolescence that parents are probably the most important thing. I mean, parents are the most important thing in kids' lives, but they need community. And they need mentors who aren't their parents, and adults, like trusting adult relationships that aren't their parents. And school can't do everything. And so this is identifying need at every age and filling it in through a development system that would be federally funded, universal, and free.
And one of the things that I think about, which I'm starting to run into it with my 8-year-old, but I think about a lot, is in those later years too. It's become more common for kids to start doing all these extracurricular type activities. And that also requires parents to shuttle them around. And they cost money. And I've seen research from, I think folks at Harvard did a paper that I came across where it talks about like kids who they expand their social networks through extracurriculars, through sports, or other things. That really provides a path to economic mobility. But when we have a system where sports are professionalized at such a young age, and it's so expensive to get your kids training, we have rec programs dissipating because they can't get parents to volunteer because they're all working. I also feel like, something I haven't really gone into yet on this podcast, but I also see with your system, like it addresses that too, because kids need to be doing productive things that enhance their character outside of school. And as you get in those older years, if they don't have really caregivers around and their parents aren't paying an arm and a leg and shuttling them around to AAU practice for whatever, that's also where you kind of get this stagnation in economic mobility and lack of opportunity.
Yeah, so it's a research finding called positive youth development, and it answers the question, what helps kids be resilient? What helps them stay strong in the face of the various hits that life will offer you, sometimes before 18, sometimes after? And what they found is that there's this a key set of factors that can really help kids stay resilient as they age into adults. And it's, feeling like they belong to a community, feeling like they have mentors that aren't their parents, being in environments where they get a chance to experiment, to learn, to lead, to follow, just really, think of like the best summer camp you've ever heard of. That really helps kids. And it's not just you think that, and your intuition as a parent will say, like, I think my kid learned a lot from this camp. I mean, he only learned how to tie knots, but he came home a different kid.
Yes.
There's a lot of research behind that, that this idea of like almost like controlled experimentation, structured freedom to really grow as an adult in a place where you're not in a classroom, you're not being tested. You know, what I say kind of all the time is you know, you can fail science class, but you can't fail space camp. Right? You're just experimenting with knowledge. There is very good evidence that your intuition as a parent, that an amazing summer camp can really help your kid grow into an adult. Lots of evidence behind that, as well as lots of evidence that many children lack almost any access to things like that, or it's a very rare experience. So what I have said in talking about the system is that once you get over like this like political like, wait, that's so expensive, or like, you don't tell me what to do with my kid, and you ask parents about what they want, I designed the system for what parents reported that they wanted.
Yeah.
In studies of after school programs and study of summer camp programs, like they want a place for their kid to thrive. Parents are worried about how anxiety ridden school has become with testing. Parents are worried about how expensive it is to get their kids into good programs after school and summer, how expensive it is to join a soccer team, that they're moving heaven and earth and paying an arm and a leg to try to get a good experience from their kid, where if we know that it's good and we know how to make it, like, y'all, this shouldn't have to be so hard. So I really tried to design the system for what parents want. It fits this, again, like there's a gap that needs to be filled, but we're filling it with intention, and we should fill it with what parents want. And parents want great experiences for their kids. And the reason why it's bridged with early childhood, which is a little bit more of a culturally and politically fraught conversation, but the reason why it's bridged is because child development in public school is also not compatible. And there's lots of, again, if you were to ask someone who is a child development psychologist, they would tell you, or a child development specialist, they would tell you that ages like 3 to 8 and 4 to 8 are really critical years, but they're cut in half by the public school system. And so you'd want to have a bridge that's like a complement to maintain consistency through this period, you know, one. And two, it's very, you know, devastating to talk about this, but most of the economic inequality that we have in the United States is imprinted on children when they show up for their first day of kindergarten. And we have this very incorrect, widely held belief that what's best for children varies on the location and type of childcare they have, whether the mom stays at home, whether the kid's at a home-based care or a center-based care or with a nanny. When the harsh truth is, it doesn't matter. Rich moms will get whatever they want for their kid in whatever setting. And what predicts kindergarten preparation and readiness and early literacy and numeracy is not the type of care the kid was in before 5, but how rich the mom was and how educated the mom was, because she will get the best version of whatever exists. And that is what leaves a mark. It's not staying at home. It's not going to a center. It's what you were able to do in those situations with the money and education you have. And I think if you make that part clear, if you want to stay home, that's great. If you want to send your kid to a center, that's great. We have economic inequality starting by 5. We need to do something before 5 if we're truly going to make this a system that fills in the gap. And I try to stress this, even though it's a really just totally devastating point, because I think people put so much of an emphasis onto, it's always struck me as a conversation that reveals a deep insecurity among parents, that they're worried that they're not doing their best for their children. So they have to, especially in 0 to 5, so they almost have to like hunker down, white knuckled, what I chose is best, and therefore what you chose is not. And you end up in this fight over staying at home versus a co-op versus a Mother's Day out versus a center. And it's much more indicative of how people feel, and not what we know leads to different outcomes for kids. And I think that's hard for parents to hear, but it's a truth that reflects our American economy.
Yeah.
I don't love crashing people's dreams or raining on their parade and saying like, well, what you did didn't matter. It's just a matter of being predicted by income, which is such a like smug thing for an economist to say. But I pointed out to stress that like this system, again, like I tried to think at every stage of what parents want. I think what parents want is security that they're doing right by their children, especially when they're quite young. And a lot of people don't have that comfort. And so if we can build a system that offers support and resources, no matter what you choose of staying at home or putting your kids into a full-time care, that you have a system that's there to help you as opposed to having a political conversation that is trying to judge you.
I mean, I agree with all of that. And I I so appreciate you having data and like an evidence-based conversation behind what I think we all inherently just feel. I started thinking about doing something like this podcast not long after I resigned from my full-time role, because my first thought was, wow, I'm so fortunate that I even have the choice of saying, you know what, this isn't for me. I'll find another way to make money. I'm just gonna leave my full-time job and forge a different path. So many parents don't have that choice. All they can do is remain on this like relentless treadmill that is going too fast and try to make it to like the next month or the next week or the next day. And it's not working. And I think what I see is everyone wants to feel like they can give their kid what their kid needs. And I see parents who want to sign their kids up for this program or that program, but they're like, well, I have two kids and they can't both do that because it is so expensive. So I got to figure something else out. And then people who are affluent, like it doesn't really matter, right? They can just sign their kids up from all the programs and all the things. And, you know, it breaks my heart to see people that just don't have the choices that they need, and they don't even have the ability to think about it. Like the amount of time, like when you're talking about child development in the summer, like the amount of time we spend making sure like our kids are getting what they need, but also doing like their summer packets and not experiencing learning loss. I mean, that is a really big job in the summer to make sure your kids are like, we spend a lot of time on it, but I'm thankful that I have the time and we can find the time to do it, because a lot of people just can't. If you're commuting, you're working long hours and like you're just trying to get by. So I think, you know, what you're saying from my perspective and what I see with my peers is that we've just put people in a really impossibly and unfair situation. And I grew up with a single working mom who rented a house in a nice town so we could go to good schools. And I think about the life I had and what she was able to do for us. And she worked so hard. She had a pretty good job, but she just had a associate's degree. She didn't have a 4-year degree. And the life I had would not be possible. Like if I was raising my kids under the circumstances she did, because the cost of everything has gone up so much as well, that sometimes I think our parents look at us and the older generations will think, well, why do we even need this at all? Like we've never had it before and it all just worked. I also think there's a cost component and then a wages component too, that as an economist, I'm sure you see too.
Yeah, it's the cost of childcare over the past 30 years has risen more than housing, food, medical care, prescription drugs, and energy. I mean, it is one of the consistently fastest increasing prices in the economy is the price of childcare. That's hard for people to internalize because it's, you know, like once you're done, you're done. You don't look at childcare prices anymore because like, my God, I don't even want to think about it. But, you know, I think the other way I thought about this system in trying to conceive it, I had a few like North Stars when it comes to design. Things like, if we've got to fill this gap with intention, what do parents want? Like, what do they actually want? Not what is a random cultural fight meant to distract us from moving forward. What do parents actually want? What can we do with the system we have? You know, what we've got stuff here, can we improve upon it? And then the third thing I thought of was, what does the system look like for people who have the rug pulled out from under them? You know, I hear a lot about, when I talk about this on social media, I get a lot of, you know, DMs and messages and emails and then of course comments on the videos, and they'll say things like, I was a stay-at-home mom until my husband left me. Yep. And then I had to go get a job and afford childcare. Yeah. I lose jobs. I was a stay-at-home mom until my husband got laid off. And then I had to find work and we had to put our kids in care. I was a stay-at-home mom, but my husband died or my husband got disabled. And there's lots of risk that people face. And if their backup is them, you know, they don't have a backup at all. Circumstances change, jobs change, marriages change, health changes, livelihood and mortality. All these things happen to families. And a system that was well designed would know that people can't be locked into a decision because their life isn't locked in. So much life happens to us. And so you take that, you know, mom who decided to stay at home, who has her third kid, and she realizes that she never sees the baby because she's spending all day trying to teach the 4-year-old what his numbers or his letters are. And so she decides she wants to put him in a preschool because she wants to spend more time with the younger kid. That also happens to a lot of stay-at-home moms where they basically kind of see the value of care once they're competing for attention with multiple kids. You don't want to design a system that's so judgmental to people's choices or locks them into it. You want to give them options. And thinking about, the single moms out there who could have had really tough circumstances. I mean, there are single dads, there are stay-at-home dads. It's just much rarer. And so I think that the cultural judgment falls on moms.
Right.
Whatever dads do, they tend to be okay. But whatever moms do, it's entirely their fault.
Right.
Good or bad. Doesn't matter what they did, they made a mistake. So that's why I tend to talk about moms, because I think it speaks not to the society and culture we have, but the one that we have. And I don't want to make it seem like women aren't judged harsher for what they do as a mom. But I guess, those are also hard things to talk about, right? Not just how much of your kid's success is determined by income or education that you have, but also how much of your own choices can be upended by other parts of life. And I think that just how tenuous and fragile our system is leaves so many parents exposed, and they shouldn't have to worry that if they lose their job, their kid loses all of their enrichment activities. Like my son used to play soccer or used to try and learn French or used to go to an astronomy club, but I lost my job and he can't do anything anymore. That's not what we want for families, and that's not what parents want for their children. And so being able to be a stable force was a huge motivator in this system.
That's wonderful. And so I want to go to the logistics of this system, because I also think it's brilliant. You mentioned earlier cost. Everyone worries about cost and fiscal responsibility. But I think what you're proposing seems incredibly efficient in that you're just trying to start with a lot of the systems that we already have in place. Could you talk a little bit about your effort to make this something that is like feasible and working with what we've already got?
Absolutely. So right now we have a market-based care system, whereas if it's early childhood, summer, or after school, for the vast majority of people, you're buying it on the market. And this market has several weaknesses and some failures. There's not enough of it. It's too expensive. It's not necessarily conveniently located to the parents. They don't always have choices over where they go. They might just have one or none options. But we do have a ton of very dedicated providers, right? They probably don't like how hard it is to make money off of the system either. But we have a lot of people who have experience in this space, who have dedicated their careers and their lives to this space, and we shouldn't cast them aside. So when you hear free childcare or free after school, your mind probably jumps to a very Soviet place of a nondescript gray building that the government has built where your kids clock in and clock out for mandatory activity time. And when people hear that the government pays for something, they immediately jump to the government provides it. Yeah. And then they immediately jump to, and that means it's low quality and bad. And so you have to kind of break your associations here for how this would work in practice. If the government pays for something, they don't have to provide it themselves. They can. And for childcare, for what it's worth, they do a really good job, just not for everybody. They do provide childcare for the military, and they do provide childcare directly for people in Head Start. But we do have this base of lots of private providers. So the way that they would be brought into the fold is through a reimbursement model. So right now, close your eyes, think of your childcare center, or think of your summer camp. You pay their tuition rate set by whatever the market dictates, and they charge you for your kid. Under the child development system, it's the same building, same person, same place, but you drop off your kid, and then that provider bills the federal government and says, this is the type of care I'm providing. These are the number of kids I have. This is the type of center I am. And the government writes them a check for reimbursement. So the money equation moves from parent and provider to provider and government. And the government works off of a reimbursement model. What's great about that is that the government doesn't have to be profitable. And they shouldn't be, because making money off of children is not great.
Yeah.
And it's done things like suppress the wages of people who work in the field.
Yes.
Or made the conditions and kind of quality of the environment low because they can't afford to invest in, say, better capital infrastructure. So when the government pays for things, government money, the best money, right? Federal dollars from on high comes down to your childcare center, and then it comes with a little bit of rules attached. Like you need to make sure your staff is paid at least X dollars per hour. And if your staff is being paid $20, $25, $30 per hour, all of them need to have a certificate in early childhood. All of them need to be CPR certified. All of them need to have, X, Y, or Z. And then you can do things like create a capital fund. So if your childcare center needs to invest in its infrastructure, like we'd like to build a new classroom, the government can help pay for that. So it doesn't have to be run off of the profit they make off of your paycheck, but off of what the federal government invests in. And this reimbursement model opens the door to get higher quality because you can pump money in and the government can dictate exactly what it wants. And the government wants what you want. The government wants people who are paid a decent wage, who love what they are doing, who are in a field where they can grow as a career, to get more certifications. I mean, we could make a national apprenticeship program around child development where you don't have to go to college, but you can get extra training. We can make this into a way for small businesses to grow. Like there's lots of ways that the profit motive undercuts what we're able to provide children. And a federal reimbursement opens the door to whatever you want. That's part one. That's the providers. Now, who distributes this money? This is the part that can get really fun if you are a policy nerd, but also if you think about, I think the easiest way to conceptualize this part is right now the government announces starting tomorrow, we're going to pay for all childcare after school in summer. First thing that's going to happen is like millions of people will sign up their kids and there won't be enough room. So this system has to expand. So who leads the expansion? Is it like someone from a federal agency who's like in a regional office that comes in? And how do they meet with parents and providers and the community? What's nice about this system is that because it doesn't have to be dictated by market profitability, you basically give communities a chance to say, here is where we want care. Like we've never had a good summer camp on the east side of town, or we have a massive manufacturing facility and the employer says, we'd like to set up a child care center on site because so many of our workers work after 5. And so we want to run an after school program. So everybody who works at our factory or at our building, their kids get shuttled to on site and do an after school program here. And then the parents collect them on the way out the door. Those are types of things that if you, with the profit motive, they're just not really justified. But if you're truly trying to meet families where they are, you get to be really creative. And so this leads to things like, people who don't work regular shifts, like emergency service workers, police officers, EMTs, people who are 7 to 7 at a hospital, people who work at certain factories. You can start developing care and after school and summer around their schedule, right? There's no rule that says childcare and after school and summer ends at 5. It can go later. You can also do geographic distribution. Like we don't have after school on this side of town, or we don't have summer on this side of town. Or you can do things like partner with institutions in your community and expand their role. So, we're in a more religious part of town or a more religious part of the country, and we've got a lot of churches and they're empty 5 days a week, but they want to build child care centers. And so we can start putting in like institutional investments into growing this part of the community where it's not religious education, but this is an institution I trust and people I trust where I would be okay sending my kids. So it opens up so much money for communities to get resources where they want to be directed, as opposed to where the rich enough parents are to drive it. That type of control on the community level and that type of preference expressed on a community level, that's so great because it all goes back to what we think helps children, and it's strong sense of community. Right. But community doesn't exist in a bubble, and lots of money to a community center to expand its offerings and be more present in families' lives, that's only a win for children. So you can think of one group I was talking to about this. They have an immigrant community center, like a cultural center, and the children of immigrants, they're all American. Yeah. The parents want them to but they could do after school at the center where they learn our language or learn our cuisine. Yeah. And then and they come home, right? Like it's those types of, you need to think, how do I say this? Scarcity has made us really uncreative. Yes. It's made us really uncreative. We're so clawing our way to something sustainable that's hardly sustainable at all, that's so fragile because of how much it cost us and how hard it is to execute, that it makes it really hard to think as broadly and creatively as possible. But when you do think creatively, it's like, oh, it would actually be really cool. We have this like theater group at our town, and it would be great if that theater could host an after school theater program for kids.
Yeah.
Just teaches them to get on stage, because maybe if my kid gave a speech from a play, he wouldn't be quite so shy.
Yep.
Right. And then once you start thinking creatively, you're like, wait, why don't I have this system already? And like, let's get the theater some money so my kid can dress up. Like, it's a very different mindset, but it takes a while to like get there.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds kind of like you're talking about a massive market failure. And I thought the government was kind of designed to help out in these situations. So it sounds very, very reasonable.
Well, and hopefully the way I'm talking about it, I'm trying to make the point, which I can say clearly, which is an expansion of government isn't an expansion into family. It's an expansion into markets. I don't want the government in my house. I don't want the government raising my kids, but I also don't like that a for-profit market raises my kids.
Yes.
I want there to be access to development, to opportunities for my children. And I don't want it to be something that I have to pay so much money for that they profit off of whatever they give my kids. I'm not asking the government to come into my life. I'm asking the government to go into that market, because that market is failing me. And we so often kind of assume an expansion of government means a sacrifice of family. But an expansion of government more often than not means a sacrifice of the market. And what I try to stress to people is this market does not have many defenders.
No,
when you hear someone say, we need free childcare, their answer isn't, no. What we've got is great. Their answer is, well, women should just stay home. I mean, there is no one out there defending the current market system. No one is saying it's affordable. No one is saying it's available. No one's saying it's easy to navigate or doesn't present an incredible logistical burden. What they are saying is that market is terrible, but actually it's mom's fault. Because if they admit that the market is terrible, and they say quite plainly, even at the age of 4, 2/3 of moms are working and kids are in some type of care situation, they'd have to admit they failed. So it's easier to say you've failed as a mother than to say I've failed as a policymaker, because my sphere should be to protect you from this market and I've done a bad job. If a market doesn't have a single defender, that's how you know it's time for the government to step in.
Love it. And on that note, I want to bring this back to a statement in your proposal, which really stuck out to me, because we're talking about costs and we're talking about, the government collects revenue and they spend the revenue. Our government collects a lot of money from all of us in the form of taxes, and they spend a lot of money. And that gets down to priorities. I think we look at our budget, we look at inflows and outflows. It's a reflection of priorities and values. And what you say is combining early childhood before and after school and summer into a unified child development system is a statement of values. These 3 areas are not ranked, and policy should not be triaged between them. And I thought that was such a great statement, because it really puts, I think, the onus on policymakers and on us a little bit to force their hand and hold them accountable. And I love to just for you to flesh that statement out a little bit further and just really talk about this as a reflection of values.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't have to rank how we help children. And I think that so often we kind of treat the type of interventions that families need as some type of pecking order. Like, well, that's not quite as important as this. And it can make people feel demeaned and devalued. What I didn't want to have happen in this system, and what I was most afraid of, is that if you did it piecemeal, you'd be fighting over resources. Like, well, that's the child bucket, and I already spend a lot in the child bucket, so I'm not going to spend any more in the child bucket, so y'all need to figure it out. And I think that I didn't even want that to be a possibility. We are not fighting over resources of like the 10-year-old versus the 3-year-old. Because when you're fighting over resources, you're fighting over families. And when you're fighting over families, you're fighting over choices, and it leads to judgment and kind of like cultural judgment and social judgment and economic judgment. And it's just, there's not a place for any of those things when you're talking about a 10-year-old. Does the 10-year-old need something? Yes. Does the 3-year-old need something? Yes. So your job is to fill it and not to pit these 2 groups of people against each other in order to save money. And I don't feel like the government should be able to save money by getting you to be mad at another parent. It's cheap and it's mean and it's beneath us.
Yep.
So you pay for the whole thing. And I am not falling into your trap of saying kindergarten's more important than 10th grade. Like you would even know, member of Congress. Like you would even have a way to assess that statement. No, write the check. We can cover all kids. And I think I'm not going to start with a compromise. I'm starting with this is about all kids, and you're not sending me off into another room to decide which kids are actually most important. I'm not going to do that. So you need to be better.
I love it.
That was really it. And I will say, like, for people who are worried about cost, this is going to sound super condescending. So at least I'm telling you that it sounds super condescending before I start talking. So maybe you'll still listen to me. But I'm going to say this with all the love I have in my heart. You have no idea how much things cost the federal government. You have been told through political rhetoric for 40 years, this is too expensive. But it's not as if you are looking at a list of 20 different policies that the federal government could pursue, ranked by their cost to the federal government. And the reason why you think it would be so expensive for them to pay for childcare after school is because that number is near the top. Y'all, that number's not even in the top 10. They tell, like, the rhetoric around helping families is it's too expensive. But in practice, we have a way of assessing cost to the federal government. And y'all, this is not that expensive. Certainly not as expensive as other policies we pursued. So the one big beautiful bill included $4.5 trillion in tax cuts over a 10-year period. So it's about a $450 billion a year the federal government just sent towards tax cuts. Keep in mind that in 2017, they did the exact same thing, except for it was around $210 billion a year. They also did it in 2012 with a separate tax cut that was around $360 billion a year. And they did it in 2001 and 2003 with a pair of tax cuts that were around $150 billion a year. And over the past 24 years, Congress has passed in total of 10-year cost over $12 trillion in tax cuts. And no one has ever told you this is way too expensive, we can't afford it. Yep. But it is the most expensive policy the federal government pursues, bar none. So if we can pursue tax cuts to a historic degree every 4 years, we can definitely pay for childcare. An example I give is that, all right, so the current tax cut, $450 billion a year for the next 10 years. At the start of his administration, Biden proposed a free preschool and capped cost for childcare. For what it's worth, I hated this policy, but it was scored. We did come up with a cost assessment, and it was projected to cost $38 billion a year.
Wow.
So I thought what I hated about that proposal is that it was piecemeal. Yeah. It didn't protect all families, and it was administratively complicated. Yeah. So let's just say, like, hey, man, you were only going to cover part of kids, and you were only going to make it free for some of them. So let's assume that it's 4 times that. Even if it's 4 times what Biden proposed, it's still a fourth of the cost of the bill that just passed. So the capability of the federal government is almost infinite. Yeah. Yes. The preference to help children is simply not there. And don't, like, that same type of scarcity mindset that makes you uncreative about what we can do in a child development system. It's the same type of scarcity mindset that has conditioned you to think that you're not allowed to ask for things from your government for your children, when you absolutely are. And you absolutely should. And honestly, it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
So don't. Now, there are these set of people who think that the government, it's not the government's money if it's your taxes. And I mean, legally it is. And they will say that the government's not spending money when it gives taxes back to you. So that's not a fair comparison. And I think the weakness of that argument reveals just how shallow that defense is. The current tax bill that just passed, it's on average going to send families in the top 10% of income. So these are the richest 10% of families. On average, will get $1,000 a year back from the federal government in taxes than they would have otherwise paid. So over the course of 10 years, the richest families in America will be around $140,000 richer over that period, simply because the federal government wrote them a check every year. If you think that money is, that this simply being returned what's owed to them is one thing, but you can't say that the government didn't play a role. And so I think that these are resources that we could use to have a good tax system to pay for things and the investments we want to make. When people say it's too expensive, I'm like, you haven't seen expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, cost is important. It's totally important. I just don't think families should bear it anymore.
Yeah. If it's too expensive for the government, yet they seem to find money for all sorts of things these days when they want to. If it's too expensive for the government to step in where they should, where there's been a market failure, why isn't it too expensive for us to have to bear it? It's incredible.
I wrote the report, but I also have a newsletter called Kedits in which I wrote about this. And I talk about how, like, think of like the worst case cost scenario where after we do the child development system, all kinds of people are pissed off that they're not getting money. And so you have to do a bunch of other stuff too. Like, all right, if we do child development, then I've got to appease, we need paid family leave. And if I do paid family leave, I need to do something for stay-at-home moms because I just invested in child development. And like now K through 12 schools are mad because they didn't get money. So I have to give them this too. And imagine it's just this like massive federal shakedown. Because once you start investing in kids, all the people who have waited for child investments are like, nope, I need to come too. In that fiscal scenario where all of these people are demanding money for the federal government, it is still less than the tax cut that just passed. So rest assured, we could afford, paid family leave for every parent in the United States, a universal child development system that is free for all families from 0 to 18, universal free school meals for every kid in public school, breakfast, lunch, and if they're after school, a snack, as well as a monthly stipend for every kid that is not dependent on the work status of their mom that gives them basic economic stability. And it's cheaper than the tax cut we just passed. Y'all, it's not expensive. It's just if we want to pay for it. And your members of Congress currently don't, but that doesn't mean that we're not capable of it.
So on that note, I always like to end these with a call to action. So for people that are listening, that are fired up, I'm telling you, I've printed out your proposal and I'm probably just going to go to my congressman's office and drop it on his desk and say, I want this. I will accept nothing less. Make it happen. And by the way, these people are all going on recess in August.
Yeah, they should be in your neighborhood.
So we could all just do that. So what else can people do? You've got a newsletter so they can follow your work, but how do we make this happen? If everyone's like, yes, let's do it. How do we catalyze the energy?
I'll say that if you feel like knocking on your members of Congress door is it's a failure before it even begins, I would never tell anyone they need to feel inspired by the U.S. Congress, but y'all should know I've already talked to 3 members of Congress staff about this. There is interest in doing something like this. Members of Congress, I mean, they know that people in their community are struggling with this. And so they are very interested in the solution. Now, 3 out of like 535 ain't a ton, but it ain't nothing. That was just a month after the report came out. So I think there is salience and I think there is interest in being able to galvanize around something. Call your member of Congress or just tell people in your community about it. Say, I've heard that we can do this. I mean, one of the biggest limitations the U.S. faces right now is an incredible prevailing sense of pessimism and lack of empathy of like, well, I can't do that. I mean, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. And people want to dismiss you and you say, I have this big dream. Like, I think we should do better by children. And they'll just look me in the face and say, that's never going to happen. Their pessimism comes from a lot of places, but it doesn't speak to our actual capabilities. Yeah. And so I think being able to talk to people and say, I think we can do a lot better than this. And there are really good people who have ideas that want to do more. And here's one. That conversation in your community matters just as much as the conversation with your member of Congress, because if people don't believe that the future can be better, they'll never fight for it.
Yeah. And honestly, as a political troublemaker in my free time, I will say I've been involved in campaigns. I've been involved with things where people say, that's just such a long shot, that so-and-so is running against an incumbent or whatever. But when people are really, really unhappy and we actually realize the power we do have in a democracy with our vote and with our voice, incredible things can happen. And things that seem really unfeasible become feasible if we actually get up and demand what I think is not such a far-fetched thing here. And I think I don't know any parent who's currently just like happy.
So satisfied. Every part of
mean, maybe I know a few, but they are the ones benefiting from this tax cut and they maybe inherited massive wealth and they really don't have much to worry about anyway. Other than that, those of us that are really grinding it out are just like, this is insane. And you look no further than the working mom subreddit to see how absolutely catastrophic this is all. So thank you so much for your time. I'm printing this out. I'm bringing it to my congressman who called me recently for a donation for his reelection campaign. So I'm going to say, You want my money? Here you go. Get this done. I want to see you on Capitol Hill within a week's time talking about this before
You
I
know,
send you a donation.
and the other thing I'll say is I should like shill for myself. I have a podcast called Optimist Economy where every episode we talk about this like allegedly terrible thing and how it can be fixed. And it's not about like the goal of the show is just to convince you that we can do better and not necessarily to like get you to believe everything that I say in terms of like here's my policy idea. It's just like, oh, you know what else we could do? And people who disagree with me think this, but it's very much just trying to empower people with optimism. Because if you're optimistic, you fight for a lot more than if you're pessimistic. Pessimists defend, optimists fight. So I think we need some fight. And that's what we do every episode of the podcast. And it's not just about childcare. We did minimum wage, the national debt. I would encourage all of y'all to believe that America can be better because that's how we get it there.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great note to end it on. So thank you so much for your time. And I will certainly include links to all this great content in the show notes so everyone can follow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.